Hi everyone, I'm the Rambling Photon, and today I'd like to talk about some questions for self-reflection. And this is partly because of the whole lacy green kerfuffle that's been going on between sort of the feminists and the anti-feminist red-pilled, I guess, community, and talking about, I think, some steps that we could use to have a slightly more productive discussion. And so as part of this, I want to I have some questions that I'd like people to be asking themselves when they engage with people whose viewpoints are different from their own, and also to ask themselves just to help evaluate their own position. And these are questions that I find myself asking myself a fairly decent amount. And so the first question is, what are the values that anchor your position? So what essentially this sort of goes to some of my thoughts on the memetics and the cultural species type thing, right? So what are your core values? Why do you hold the position that you hold? Not in terms of evidence, but in terms of why that evidence convinces you of your position. So we all have sort of unspoken assumptions that guide our arguments on that stuff. So this could be as simple as life is sacred, therefore killing people is wrong, right? That's sort of a, human life is sacred. It would be sort of a core value, right? So why do you hold these values? And then are your values axiomatic? Are they fundamental? Or are they contingent upon other values? Right? So take this example, human life is sacred. Is that your core value? Or is that a value that's contingent upon other premises? My next question is, could there be anything that changes those values? So if they are contingent, if they are subject to argument, is there any evidence or data that would convince you that your values are wrong? Are they challengeable? Okay. And I think this is particularly important because if you are willing to acknowledge that your axioms, your values cannot be changed, then you should be honest about not being willing to change them, and you should be honest about how fundamental they are in some ways to your worldview, and that you'll see everything through that lens, and you won't be able to change it. So if your values can't be challenged, then there's no point in having a discussion with you personally about those values, unless I suppose if you're trying to proselytize, then that's something that happens. But if you have two people who have the same sort of unchallenged, unchanging view, there's no real point in a dialogue between them, except in a public forum. And this is something that I saw to some degree from certain entities who I will not name, where they portrayed a conversation as the other side was not willing to be convinced by what we said. And I think it's important to think about the reciprocal of that. Would you have been willing to be convinced of what they said? Because if not, then you're just proselytizing, you're not having a discussion, you're not having a dialectic, you're not trying to come to the truth and acknowledge that you might be wrong. And we should all acknowledge that we are capable of being wrong. It's something that humans are very good at, actually. Okay, so another question that I have regarding the values is, what are situations where your values might come in conflict with each other? Okay, so let's take this earlier example of life is sacred, and therefore killing people is wrong, right? Now, is there a case where a lot of people who hold that belief are willing to make an exception? They're willing to change sort of a particular case or a nuance of it due to some other value. And very oftentimes the answer is yes. So, example, life is sacred, and conflicting value, the right to self-defense. Is it okay to end a life in self-defense? A lot of people will say yes. So the right to self-defense in certain cases can trump the right to the value that life is sacred. Okay, so then you get into the question of what are the circumstances where life is the sacredness of life is not as important as some other value. Okay, and these are also interesting discussions to have. So I guess really what I want to get to is what would it take to change your position? What is the evidence that you would require? Let's assume that it's good evidence. Let's assume that any evidence that we're talking about is true. What kind of evidence would it take to show you that you're wrong and that you need to change your position? Okay. For a value that is not necessarily beholden to evidence, what sort of argumentation would be required to challenge your position? Okay. So I guess I'll leave it to you guys in the comments. What are your sort of axiomatic values? What do you consider to be the core value of your positions? How is that core value reflected in your positions? And then what evidence or argument do you think would persuade you to change your positions, if not your values or axioms? Okay. All right. So that's that for this video. If you are a fan of my content, like, share, subscribe, comment below. This has been the Rambling Photon. Hope to catch you next time.